Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Sam Dever Podcast, episode 41. In this episode, I speak with filmmaker and author Kelly Schwarze. I met Kelly back in my Las Vegas days and had the privilege of working with him on a few of my projects, and he is an incredible talent, from filmmaking to book writing to writing films and scripts, and the man does it all. Not only is he a genius creatively, but he has found a way to create businesses and monetize his art. And I think he's a wonderful example to so many creatives out there, not even just in filmmaking, but across the board. And with that being said, the books of the episode are actually books Kelly has written. He's written several, but I picked these two. His book, What Film Schools Don't Tell You: Your Basic Guide to Making Movies and Finding Good Distribution. Such a good book, especially if you're wanting to make films. Kelly has basically given you the blueprint to take control of your film career and really turn a business into it. His most latest book is a book for young readers called Myron Pesky and the Basketball Nightmare. Really great story, especially because I played basketball growing up in middle school and high school, so I really resonated with a lot he had in this book. Really awesome. Just highlights how super talented Kelly is and the wide range of creativity he has. So again, What Film Schools Don't Tell You and Myron Pesky and the Basketball Nightmare, both are available on Amazon. With that being said, here's my conversation with Kelly. Kelly Schwarze, welcome to the Sam Dever Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. It's really, really awesome to be here, and it's always good to see you, my friend.
Oh, great to see you. And I've been waiting to say that name in the intro because I've been wanting to have you on here for a while. And how is life right now? How is life with Kelly Schwarze?
You know, life is cool. I feel so blessed to do everything that I'm doing, and just to be surrounded by the folks that I'm surrounded by. And just having good people in my life, you know, like yourself. And it's, you know, if something the pandemic has showed me is that you really have to take some stock in the people around you, you know. And, you know, it's always important to, you know, pull people up, push them up, you know, motivate them if you have to, because there's a lot of people that are hurting. But at the end of the day, the people that are in my group and just my friends, my community, I'm very thankful for those folks. And life is good. I mean, you know, writing books, making movies, you know, it's a lot of busy stuff going on, but you know, at the end of the day, it's all good.
And that's the thing. I'm glad to hear all that. And that's the thing with you. I'm like, man, like we could take one thing you do and talk about that for hours. So I know a lot of this is going to be probably just throwing a lot at people. But so before we dive in, because I definitely want to talk about some of your latest projects you've done before. For people who don't know who you are, can you just give us the bullet point version of how you got to where you're at right now?
You know, I wish I had a more entertaining way to introduce myself, but I am a filmmaker, author, you know, and I am a person who loves learning as much as I can about the things that I do. And I feel like, if anything, I'm a student. I'm a student of film. I'm a student of writing books and business. And I love how things evolve and how things are changing in our business. And I've had the great pleasure to open a studio in Las Vegas called the Indie Film Factory with my wife. And we have had a pretty good run. We're going on 11 years this year.
Yeah, the Indie Film Factory is such a special place to me because I really feel like that was... It really, I mean, for probably many people, but I know for me personally, was really what led me to LA, because that's where I started taking acting classes and doing projects with you there. And then it just created such a magical space there in Las Vegas.
Oh, thank you. You know, it's so great when you see people, you know, creating content or doing things, and then just knowing that, like, hey, they filmed some of that in the studio. I mean, I remember shooting a video with you in the studio, and I'll every so often I'll see those pictures pop up, and I'm like, man, we did some really cool stuff in there. We're saying a really cool time, and it's we call it the sandbox. You know, it's literally like a play box for kids, filmmakers, and creative people, and it's been fun like that.
I'm coming back to the sandbox. I'll talk to you more
Uh,
about that off camera. But yeah,
always,
I'm coming back to Mecca. But yeah, and that's one thing. That's one thing. I mean, I'm going to plug your book right now. One of them.
oh, great.
You wrote the book "What Film Schools Don't Tell You." To
Yes.
any of my filmmaking friends or people listening to this, I cannot recommend it enough. You really laid out a blueprint, a realistic blueprint, and a step-by-step guide how you can be not only just an independent filmmaker, but an independent filmmaker who turns it into a business. And that's one thing I've always admired and noticed about you, because you meet people all the time that are creatives and make films, and they're ultra talented, but not many of them have the business acumen that you have. You've been able to make money at what you do, but still making art and having fun at the same time. Could you go into a little bit of that?
Yeah, well, obviously filmmaking at its core is an art form, but the movie business is just that. It's an economy, and it's a business. And I think a lot of filmmakers forget about that part. And it's just a part that people aren't taught in film school. I mean, film schools are great about teaching camera angles and screenwriting and editing and all those other things, which are very important. And I don't want to devalue that. But there's a business aspect to the trade that I think filmmakers are not always aware of when they get into this industry, and it becomes something of a bit of a stressor, and a lot of people fizzle out, or they end up working different jobs that they don't really want to be in, and there's a lot of pain. And my whole idea was that I took the hard bumpy road, and as a part of that, it's given me the ability to write about it, and in hopes to save some other filmmakers from going down those same journey as I did. It's never going to be easy. Anytime you want to do whether it's music or filmmaking or being an author or whatever, it's not going to be easy. But if you're able to at least understand how the business operates and how you can kind of create something that's a business plan for your productions and your ideas, I think it helps in a lot of ways, and it makes you start thinking a little bit differently about the kind of stuff that you're doing. It's not just about creating fun stuff that makes your friends happy or your family happy. It's creating something that you can build an audience and build a fan base with and support. And through that, you can do more and more of it. Some people don't get into the business to do it as a career. Some people do it for the art, and they'll say, I just want to make that one movie that I've always wanted to make, and then I'm done, but there's a lot of people that this is what they want to do for their life. This is what they want to do for their career. And that's what this book and what I talk and lecture about all the time is about.
And I don't know if this was in the book or not, but I think it came from a conversation with you, because you really blew my mind when you did the movie. If I'm butchering any of the titles, please let me know. Alien Domicile.
Yes.
And then you did Abigail.
Yes, Abigail.
So,
Abigail. Yeah.
Yeah, which both really good, and especially Abigail blew me away. Like that one was like, I remember, I think I told you on the phone when I watched it, I'm like, Kelly took that one to the next level. That was so good.
Very much.
So
Thank
good.
you.
And I remember a conversation with you, and again, correct any of this if I'm remembering it correctly, but you said I think it was sci-fi and horror were some of the most searched movies on Amazon. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. I mean, those are big success genres on those platforms, because a lot of people love that stuff, and surprisingly, supernatural, scary movies and things like that are very popular amongst people. People like that escapism, and there's a huge market for it. But on another end of the spectrum, technology and the production value of independent filmmaking is increased over the years so dramatically that it is allowing filmmakers to be more experimentative in the stuff that they're doing. So science fiction lends itself to that. Comedies are a little bit tougher when you're dealing with a low budget, because you have to have star power in a lot of cases in order for it to really resonate with audiences. So it can be very challenging in comedy, especially trying to sell it internationally. But sci-fi, horror, those are films that can do well across the board, because those genres kind of lend themselves to some of the more frugal aspects of filmmaking.
Well, and that's why what I thought was so interesting about it, because I felt you were mixing the business with the creativity, because you go, okay, what are the popular stuff out there? What are people watching? Okay, let me just go there. But then when you went there, you go, all right, I'm going to make my own thing. But I felt it was like a mix of both worlds. Like you thought business, like what are people going to watch? But then all right, I'm going to get creative and make my thing in that genre. And you really opened my mind to like looking at it differently.
Yeah,
That approach.
it's about reverse engineering things, you know. So
Right.
for if you somebody said, hey, red cars are really popular, and if you want to be in the car business, you have to make red cars. You know, from a creative standpoint, there's a lot of different ways to make a red car, and it's about how you design the car, how it looks, how it performs, what's under the hood. All of those things are going to be very important to making the success of that product, but also to be expressive in the kind of product that you want to make. You know, so it's not about just saying, oh, I'm going to make a horror film, so I'm going to make these kind of movies. It's really about understanding the genre of the business, and then creating within a structured environment. You know, that's the thing. You know, that there's a takeaway with all of this stuff is finding the genres that work, and then building a library of work within that framework. And it helps. It really helps, and it lends itself to success over the long term.
Yeah, I love that red car analogy, and I have to ask you this, and I've probably talked to you about this a little bit before. Quentin Tarantino is one of my favorites, and I just love watching his interviews. And he talked about his process, and he said basically he doesn't force anything, but when the idea comes, right then and there, he knows, well, this is my life for the next 2 to 3 years. I am going to go do this thing now, and he'll spend, I don't know if it's a year writing or however long, just 8 hours a day, every single day. So I'm just curious, because you have done several movies now. You continue to do movies. What is your process? Is it the same every time? Has it been different? Could you take us through maybe Kelly has an idea to premiering Kelly's feature movie?
Yeah, it's funny. You know, when I'll come up with an idea when I'm driving, and it'll be something as simple as seeing somebody on the side of the road walking, or an interaction between people, and then I think to myself, like, characters. I just think of characters. It's usually the first place an idea comes into mind, and then I think about like a scenario that those characters would be interesting in, and from there it develops into, you know, just kind of an idea. And then at that point, that's when I run it through the filters of my process. And my process is really about, you know, understanding, okay, well, if this is something that I want to explore and spend any length of time developing, could it be something that would be programmable within the realm of like the genre of camps that I work in? And then at that point, from there, if it sticks, you know, then it goes up the flagpole in terms of becoming like a beat sheet, you know. And I spend a lot of time on creating beats. And what beats are is basically a structured format for a screenplay. Some filmmakers don't like working within beats, but I always find it's helpful because I think of it as like the framework of a house, right? So your house can look like anything. Any house, you take any house, you tore the walls out and you just went down to the studs, chances are it would all look quite similar, you know, in terms of the logistics of what it is. And so I like working within beats because from there it allows me to shape a narrative that is well-rounded in terms of what I think it should be. And then it allows me to write the screenplay a little bit more efficiently, you know. And then after that point, we go through several months months of, you know, reading it and looking at it, and then going through the perspective of, you know, budgets. You know, I'll create a budget and then I'll go back and rewrite the script because I realize, oh, this is way over budget. So we go through this kind of ping pong aspect of development, and the process takes about two years. And then once we finally look at it, we're like, no, this is good. We can afford to do this. That's when it gets moved into production. And then production's quick. I mean, production happens within 6 months, and then you're shooting, and the shooting only takes, you know, about 2 weeks, you know, two and a half weeks or so to shoot. And our movies are very, you know, they're very small budgets, so they're fast. They're singular locations, maybe 1 or 2 locations and a handful of actors. So casting is not as intrusive to the schedule, and we take our time with it. But all in all, it's about a 3-year investment.
Yeah, wow, you just made me think. Yeah, you're right. Like the shoot really doesn't take that long in comparison of getting ready for the shoot.
Right. Yeah, the shoot goes.
It's deceiving to people because if you're not ready for the shoot, You may be able to shoot it just as quick, but I'm probably not going to turn out as good as you want it to turn out because you've so many things that you've worked through and thought of and shot lists and you name it just to prepare you for that 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, the thing about the movies that we make, and I have a lot of colleagues that are cranking 2 or 3 movies a year out, and I'm like, God bless them. I mean, it's amazing that they can do that, and I really have to tip my hat to them. For me, it's yes, it is about volume. Like if I could crank out a lot of movies like that, I probably would. But I also want to make sure that what I'm doing, like I spend a great deal of time at character development. Character development is huge for me because it goes back to me driving down the street and seeing those people walking around or something like that inspires me from the onset. Or if I read an article or something. So I think it's important for me when I do my character development to make sense, because that's all you have when you're making a small movie. You don't have a lot of times like big special effects and things like that you can drag an audience on over and over and over. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important to spend time with the character, so that way you make it believable and you make it something that resonates with audiences as they're watching it.
Is there ever a time where you've gotten into the idea and even taken it maybe several months and just been like, this isn't going to work? or
Yeah, happens all the time. And it's disappointing. And sometimes you're like, and sometimes you'll take pieces of it with you into the next thing. I remember developing another right after Alien Domicile. It was a very successful movie for us. So we were planning to do another science fiction film. And I remember I was out like with some friends and I went to go watch Annabelle. I think it was Annabelle, the movie Annabelle.
Okay. Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'll go check out this movie. So I went to go see this movie in a theater, and I was like, okay, this is a prequel or whatever it was supposed to be from the Conjuring franchise. And it was actually really, I was listening to the people in the audience, and people were like grown men, grown adults were like, they were like freaking out. And it was so fun to like watch the audience. I'm like counting the rhythm and the beats. I'm like, okay, 1, 2, 3, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. So for me, it was quite predictable, but it was so fun to watch everybody, including my friends who I was watching the movie with, freaking out. And I said, you know what? I went out of the theater and I literally called our distributor and I said, I'm making the wrong movie. I think I need to go and make like a ghost movie or something spooky. He was like, okay. And then right after that, we started developing Abigail Haunting.
Wow. All from just going to the movies.
Yeah. And so I had spent months developing that science fiction thing. It was like some, dystopian kind of world and the desert. And, it was cool. And obviously I've kind of like looked back like, oh, should I go back to that, on this next one, So it's not completely dead, but yeah, sometimes they get overlooked. And I've pulled elements from that to put into, Abigail.
This sounds really simplistic, but something I never really thought of. If you want to make movies, how important is it to watch movies?
It is very important. I think you have to have source material. I wouldn't say I'm a cinephile. Like there's people that will watch. I had the pleasure of working with Corey Taylor, which I don't know if you know who Corey Taylor is, from Slipknot. And he is a walking encyclopedia of like film. Like the guy knows, you name a horror film over the last like 30, 40 years, he's seen it, watched it, and he's going into filmmaking, and he's super cool guy. And honestly, like my brain I can't even remember half the plot lines that I watched. So for me, I am extremely hyper focused when I'm working or I'm developing to watch content that's relevant to the kind of things that I'm doing. And of course, I love watching movies, but when I go into study mode, I'm not watching them for the sake of like I'm really studying them. So I'm not watching them for entertainment purposes. I'm watching them for like what can I gain? What wisdom can I gain from what these guys did?
It's like watching game tape of the football game or something.
No, you're spot on with that. That's an excellent analogy. It is literally like watching game video.
Yeah, and so taking us to you've recently wrapped the shooting of your recent feature film, right?
Right. Yes.
Can you talk any about that? Can you say anything about that, or are you?
I certainly can. It's called Darkest of Lies, and it is a movie about a dysfunctional marriage that's pretty much on the cusp of collapse, and it's about the psychosis and the paranoia and distrust that forms at the end of a broken marriage, and whether or not this is a precursor to violence is what the big question is. And so it's a thriller. It's a thriller film. And honestly, it's a beautiful, beautiful film. I could not be any happier with my performers, that put their heart and soul into these characters. So I'm very excited about it. And it's in editing right now, and we're hoping to have a release sometime early next year.
Wow, that sounds amazing. That's something different. You haven't done something like that yet, right?
No, I haven't. And here's another thing. So we were working on this, with the success of Abigail Haunting. Building on that, we were working on another haunted house movie. Really, is what we were working on. And it wasn't until we got into the shot lists, all the way down the shot list, after I realized we're making some mistakes. We're making a different movie here. This movie is not about the ghost. This movie is about this relationship that's falling apart. It's far more interesting. And I think people are going to understand that. So to me, it became a relationship thriller and drama. And it's something that is morphed into something just, beyond my wildest imagination. And that's a part of filmmaking that I love. You'll start with one thing, and then over the course of the process, it evolves. And usually it's for the better. Usually 99.9% of the time, it evolves for the better. And I think where filmmakers can get themselves into trouble is when they refuse to acknowledge that. They're like, no, it has to be this thing. But it's because filmmaking is a collaborative effort. The more and more people that it filters through, you get the perspective of that. And when we started working with our actors and doing workshops, we realized this movie is about this couple. It's not about a ghost. It's about the couple. And it's a beautiful film.
Yeah, you hit on something I think is really important, not only for a filmmaker, but I think just any creative in general. That ability, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, I think with a couple of people, the ability to adapt and change and detach your ego, like you said, like it has to be like this, and if it's not like this, we're not doing it. But yeah, when it shows to you that it's something completely different, having that awareness and having that ability to say, to pivot and like, all right, we're going this way. No matter how much we thought it was going that way, it's clearly not, but we're going this way. Have you always had that skill, or is that just something you've adapted over time, probably through experience?
I've learned as I've gotten older in my life, that flexibility is one of the greatest virtues you can possibly have. And if you look at people that get old, I mean, we all get physically old and age, but there's a lot of people that their bodies may be of aging value, but their minds and their spirit is as youthful as any 19 or 20-year-old. And I always admire that. I always believe that you as you get older and wiser through your years, part of that wisdom is understanding that things change and you have to be able to adapt. And if you aren't able to adapt, then you're not going with the flow of life. Like life, the only constant thing that we can pretty much guarantee on is change. And it's always changing, like, whether it be through nature or anything, the planet itself, everything's changing. And we have to be able to lean into it. And yes, there's a lot of things that are painful to let go of, but that's part of it. So when it relates to filmmaking, I always think, like I was living with the story in my head. It's so wonderful and it's so great, but it's just not the right time to do this thing. And it's like, wow, I went down this road. I've wasted, 3 or 4 weeks working with this thing, or 2 months or a year, but it's okay, because you know what? All that experience in doing that is also part of the process of that growth. I had a meeting today where I was not the smartest person in the room, and the person sitting across the desk from me, gave me some really great insights. It just was like, and I left there thinking, wow, maybe I didn't like slam dunk something today, but the wisdom that I gained from this thing is like unbelievable, and it's going to make me come back even stronger,
Yeah. Everything's a lesson. Everything's a learning experience.
Yeah.
And we'll touch back on some film stuff probably toward the end, but I want to talk about your other project, book you wrote, which is phenomenal, by the way.
Oh, man,
Myron Pesky and the Basketball Nightmare, a young reader's book series. And this and the other book, and you've written other books as well, but wow, I was really blown away, especially because I was a middle school basketball player. Like, I remember tryouts. I remember I won't give the book away, but like I remember it is really like I could really relate in my own way to the book and just the way you told the story. And I'm like, what doesn't Kelly do? He does everything. Can you tell me how Myron Pesky was born?
Well, I have to give a little bit of credit to my wife and my daughter. It was at the, probably about a year and a half ago where I've always been kind of interested in writing fiction, and I wrote a book companion to Alien Domicile.
Yes, you did.
But it was a learning experience, and that book, it did what it did, and it wasn't really a huge success or whatever. But at the end of the day, I had such a great time working on it. But writing for adult fiction comes with a lot of weight, because you're living with heavy subjects and things like that. I think even more so than writing a screenplay and making a movie. So I started asking myself, if I were to write a fiction, what would I haven't tried a kid's book. And what if I just wrote from my experiences when I was a kid, because I had a lot of outrageous things that happened to me. In fact, the stuff that happens to Myron at the very end of the book actually happened to me. That's a real story.
Wow.
I experienced that humility. And obviously things turned out better for Myron than they did with me. But the whole point was I wanted to be able to channel it. And it was kind of somewhat cathartic and it allowed me to almost feel kind of therapeutic about writing about some of these topics that were kind of, wow, I buried some of those things. And we forget as we get older that there are things that we don't even remember that are like in our DNA that is somehow managed to create the person that we are today. So writing that book, my wife said, why don't you write a kid's book about like your like middle school or high school years? That might be kind of fun. I said, that's interesting. So I sat down and I didn't know what to expect. The story just flew right out of my head. I mean, it was the quickest thing I've ever written. I mean, it was like bam, bam, bam. Within 3 weeks, I had a first draft. Wow. And I mean, I was just flying through it. So I sent it to editors. I sent it through the process of getting, cleaned up, fixed up, reviewed, all that stuff. And the feedback was positive. And I said, wow, I'm gonna, maybe I could try to do this as like a series. And so that's where I'm at with it. And the book, it's taking off. It's slowly but surely going to get there. But for me, it's not really so much about just this one book. It's about this whole universe of Myron Pesky that I'm creating, because the next book that I just finished that'll be out later this year is about a bully. And that's something that we can all relate to. But all of these stories are supposed to offer some level of humility and humanity, and also a moral aspect of it. Not on a sense of some dogma or things like that, but just as being a good human and what we should try to do to always help build each other up as opposed to tearing each other down.
Yeah, and it's one thing I took from it. I know it's written for a younger audience, but I got a lot out of it. Like, these are concepts that adults need to hear.
It's awesome.
That adults can take from, especially in a world we live in now of just chaos and everyone, mad at each other and this, that, and the other. It's like, take a second to take yourself back to, and I think that's what's good about, or I'm thinking about right now about a more children's or a younger book, is kind of that all those distractions go away. You get down to the root and the simplicity of some of these concepts, especially like in the Myron Pesky, toward the end of that book, especially like humility, and it really was really a impactful read, I thought.
Yeah, one of the great parts of that book that I discovered was this relationship between Myron and his mother. And I grew up in a divorced household, and my mom was a working class mom. She was, she worked. I mean, she was out, and my sister and I, we pretty much had to, we had to take care of ourselves during the day, but I always thought, like, wow, my mom, I didn't realize it at the time, but how much hard work, like a lot of single moms, have to put into just keeping their house running. And that was unique for something in the 80s, early 80s. when I was a kid growing up. So I find that like that relationship dynamic between Myron Pesky and his mom is so cool, and that she's kind of like his kind of spirit guide, so to speak, through some of these bigger questions, and it's always that kind of platform. And I found some really cool devices that I'll be using throughout the entire series.
Definitely. And I guess the advantage you have too, with everything you do, you can make a movie out of anything. It's like whatever projects you get involved in, you're like, well, we're going to make the movie. We're gonna.
Sure. Yeah, no, and that's obviously something that could happen with this, but at the end of the day, for me, it's what's so liberating. As much as I love filmmaking, I don't have to worry about where to put the camera, with a book, and it's something I can be as creative and tell pretty much any kind of story I want. And that's something that I never fully could have realized with the mechanics of filmmaking, because it's limited to the reality by which your output process is.
It seems with you too. I mean, you really love to write. I know you love to make films, but how big of a role has, I mean, probably a huge one, the fact that you not only you're really good at it, but you enjoy doing it. It seems you love the writing process. Like, how pivotal has that been for your film career?
Oh, I think it's huge, because I think there's a lot of filmmakers that don't want to take the time to write. They just want to grab the camera and start shooting stuff, and that's cool. But that's like if you only knew how to hold a paintbrush, and you didn't know how to stretch a canvas. Stretching the canvas is equally as important as knowing how to apply the paint to the surface. So for me, it's about having the back end aspect of what I do, and locked down. I've worked with writing partners in the past in my filmmaking career, and it never was a totally great experience, because you work with some people, and some people are really disappointed when their ideas have to change, and it goes back to that conversation about being able to evolve and pivot. And a lot of writers don't do that. So I found it. I've had to learn to embrace it. And as I've gone through it, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, I can sit in a room and just write. It doesn't always come to me perfectly, but it's something that I've learned to discipline myself in doing. Because motivation to me is like an elusive thing. I never chase motivation. I always am chasing discipline. Getting up a day and applying a certain amount of time to what I'm trying to do to put myself in that mode, and then over the course of a few months, you have something that you can at least go back and work with.
Yeah. And no, that's great. And something I wanted to touch a little bit on, you do a lot of teaching, it seems to me, whether you're doing it, you lecture to college students, you're running workshops at the Indie Film Factory. That's actually the first time I ever met or saw you. Shout out to Ross Martin and the Social Media Film Festival back in Las Vegas. Part of that was doing a workshop with you, and that was my first time going to the Indie Film Factory, my first time seeing who you were. Right off the bat, I'm like, man, this guy really knows a lot about filmmaking. And also another thing I've noticed you do really well is social media. You use your social media to really give some great filmmaking tips for people. So how important has it been? Because what do they say? They go, if you want to learn, teach. Does by teaching, is that constantly enhancing your own process and what you're doing? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because teaching, because you're teaching, you have to number one, you have to make sure your information that you're giving is correct. And there's processes that you have to make sure that it's tested or applied. And so you are forcing yourself constantly to put those lectures and that material through the process of reality. I think for me, it's very important. I feel that for me personally, I need to be making movies in order for me to teach. Like, I can't teach if I'm not making movies, bottom line. And it's not to knock people who come from the academic side, because there's a lot of brilliant academics who have studied the art form, and they're able to add a lot of value to the process, whether it be through technical training or philosophy through screenwriting and all that stuff. But for me personally, it's always been important for me to make films and then teach what I know, along that process. And so as I teach, I also learn what to look for. I'm constantly learning things that I didn't see before. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I didn't see that one coming. I'm going to add that to my notes, because that could be a great chapter in a book, in terms of teaching filmmakers something. So it's kind of this kind of cohesive back and forth process that happens when I'm teaching. But I learned so much from working with students, and it's also it's a people business, right? So, I'm learning about technology that is kind of old school or new school to me, and it's forcing me to kind of step up my game, in terms of staying relevant with the tools and the platforms that we have, which goes into social media, of course.
And how's that been? What's the social media experience been like for you?
I have yet to set up a TikTok account, but I have people who are trying to push me to do it. And I finally hired a marketing person, a social media person to handle my social media, and she is fantastic. But the idea for me is, I love making sure that we are creating conversations with the stuff that we're doing. And I've been approached by very successful companies that manage, some of the bigger influencers out there. And, to me, it's important for me to be true to my brand and to me to be true to the stuff that I'm doing. So my filmmaking stuff may not get me thousands and thousands of followers, but those followers that do follow me are people that are able to use that information. That's really what's most important to me.
Yeah. And piggybacking off of that into just technology as a whole, curious to get your thoughts. So I always have this conversation with people. It's like, the technology is obviously amazing. When we say technology, I mean, not only just equipment. I mean, I just got the iPhone 13 finally, and I go, oh my God, like the camera on this, you can film a movie. Like they have like iPhone film festivals. Like everyone makes movies on iPhone. So it's given the people the power. And I know me personally, if it wasn't for social media and the phones and things like that, I wouldn't have been able to come out with a lot of stuff I've done, by myself. And I look back to like eras like maybe the 90s or the 80s, back when you needed to make a film, you needed probably millions, if not hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And now we have so many different platforms with the streaming and this, that, and the other. And it's great. And I both sides of it is, on one side, like, this is awesome. So many people are creating all this content. We have tons of content. On the other side of that, we have too much content. There's just too much. And it's mudded with all this other stuff, maybe not as quality, and they got really high quality, but it's kind of hodgepodge, this, that, and the other. And I guess I just say that to say, because I think you've watched just everything evolve, to what it is now. Is there any, I know we know the pros, is there any cons as a filmmaker such as yourself to the way things are set up now, or is it just all great for an independent filmmaker?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that we have is that the way people are consuming media is changing dramatically. And, it's evident with the pandemic. Just let me think about what happened to the movie theater industry. And a lot of people are saying, there's no way cinema is going to go. There's always going to be an exhibition. But the people that are saying that are like 35 or 40 years plus, and they're not taking into account people who are like my daughter's age, who are like 8 years old, who, you can't even sit her down for 5 minutes to watch like a film. She wants to watch videos and short form content. So there's an entire generation being raised on short form. Like it's unbelievable. And there's a lot of school of thought out there to say that, there may come a time where the feature film is completely irrelevant, or it's as novice or a novelty, like, what you would go to like watch a stage play or an opera. Where at one point in time, that was like the thing everybody did for entertainment. You go to watch an opera or some kind of a stage play, but now it's kind of more of like kind of artsy, and it's, relegated to the aspects of like fine art culture, to that extent. So, I mean, maybe films go that way. I don't know. So I think the biggest challenge, I think, for filmmakers right now is just to be flexible and keep their eyes open, and not get so married to the things that, they think they have to do. And then, take some risks. I mean, I think one of the bigger cons with with social media right now is that you can get easily caught up in a lot of negative stuff, with anything. And that goes beyond just filmmakers. That just goes on with any kind of person who's got a platform or something to say. It's so easy to voice a problem out there, So I think that the message is that just stay true to who you are and what you want to be, and just focus on your audience, and don't worry so much about whether people are getting you clicks or follows or likes or whatever. You keep going on. And here's what's cool about it. Every so often, like, I'll get, like, somebody will send me a thing, like a message from some far ends of the world. I've consulted filmmakers as far as Africa, and it's just, wow. Like, how do these people find me? But yeah, I somehow did something to inspire them, and now they're doing something to inspire other people. Like, who cares if 1,000 people like that video or not? Like, that one dude in, wherever in East Africa somewhere, like that guy inspires me so much. I had somebody from prison reach out, say they read my books like 3-4 times. His wife gave him my books, and when he gets out of jail, he's gonna make movies. And he like, he wrote me a letter, and like, wow, that means more to me than anything. So I think with social media, is it gives you that platform to be global and reach so many different people out there. But at the end of the day, it's like, just don't stress out about it. Like, just put out good content that you feels good, and stop worrying so much about, like, oh, so-and-so's got 20,000 followers or 100,000 followers, blah, blah, blah. It's not that important. I mean, yeah, it is important to some extent, but is it really important to who you are? That's the bigger question you got to ask.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. And I'll just use this podcast for an example. I mean, look, I said last night on the podcast, I just get a lot out of this, me personally, like in talking with individuals such as yourself. But there has been a few where I'll get a message from someone I had no idea that was listening or watching, and said,
sure.
And it'll always be like, when you're always like, I'm like, yeah, you know what? Maybe it's time to shut the podcast down. It's like, I've had some fun with it. Time to do other stuff. And then that one person will send you a message that will say, and I'm grateful for it, man, I really enjoyed episode yada, yada, yada. I got a lot out of that, and that really helped my life. And then, all right, I'll keep it going. But like, that's what it reminds me of, when, like, you're just doing the work. You just do the work, whatever the results are, they are. But especially when you're impacting people, and that's amazing. Someone in prison is going to turn their life around and make movies, and you inspired them to do that. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of, like, why it's important for people to share as much knowledge as they can if they're able to gain from it. One of the things that really has been a catalyst in my life is when I was coming up in this industry, there was nobody willing to share anything. There was this kind of, like, attitude that's like, you had to, like, be in the in club in order for you to get the secrets of the life, And I was always the outcast. Like, I never fit in. Like, I didn't come from money. I didn't come from high education. I didn't come from any of that. And so I was constantly having to, like, try to, like, keep up. And then I came to the conclusion one day where I'm like, I don't like any of those people I'm trying to, like, be involved with. Like, there's a problem with that. Like, I don't like that. I don't want to be involved with it. If that's the kind of world that they live in, like, no, thank you. And so I just came to the conclusion that I'm going to do this on my own. Number one, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to go out. I'm going to make a mess of it. And it's okay, because I'm going to learn. And as I learn, I'm going to start, like, leaving breadcrumbs, so that way other people can find their way through it, and that's been a lot of fun for me. So it's, I don't like bullies, and this industry and our industry in entertainment is full of bullies, and the whole industry itself is by design a bully industry. So I feel like it's kind of my little passive aggressive way to undermine that system in a way that makes sense. And I've disrupted distribution dramatically, in the context of, like, and not just me, but I mean, a lot of people that are on the platforms that are advocates for independent filmmakers, that have opened up the veil or the curtain, so to speak, on how film distribution works, and holding companies accountable for their misdeeds and how they run their businesses and take advantage of people. And that's huge. That's huge, And so to that extent, again, it goes back to use social media. As long as I can get it out there, it's like, if anybody's listening out there, here's the beacon, and, like, we don't know who's going to connect with, but and of course it's growing. It's growing. Our social media pages are growing and growing and growing. By no means would I ever in my imagination consider myself like an influencer of filmmaking, but I will say that my message is getting out there and people are getting it, and that's good enough for me. That really is good enough for me.
You remind me, I started picturing someone in the basement on a Morse code, like sending out a signal, just hoping someone will respond.
But I was thinking when I said
that. Yeah. Real quick, while I was thinking about one thing, has the miniseries been around a long time? You know how like Netflix and stuff, they'll do like a miniseries that ends. There's no season 2. Like, that's one thing I wanted to bring up to you. I think those are, I have watched more than a few of them now. And I think what's genius about them is you're basically getting to do a long extended movie. Cause like sometimes 2 hours isn't enough. You don't get enough material. And then sometimes people go for 10 seasons. It's like, all right, we've beaten this. But like to have that 7 to 8 episode miniseries where you're going to get 7 to 8 hours of cinema, really, because some of them are made like actual movies. That's one thing I think. I don't know if I don't remember those being around, but like Netflix and things like that, there seems to be more and more opportunities in that space.
Yeah, well, storytelling is content weight, and I'll try to explain this in the best way I know how. I mean, think of like if you were to lay a 2x4 or a really long piece of wood over like 2 points, and then you were to walk across. Obviously, by the time you get to the middle, that wood is sagging in the middle, right? If the shorter that beam is, the more solid it's going to be in terms of like weight bearing. But the wider the beam is, the longer it is, the more unstable it is, right? So that's the thing with storytelling. Like, so yeah, if you're telling a feature film that's full of all this information, it's really heavy and you're cramming it, and it gets heavy to the point where it feels like it could snap because it's so heavy of information. Where the miniseries or even episodic content as a rule has the luxury of being able to do shorter form periods to digest. And then from one episode to the next, it's theater of the mind to connect the dots. I mean, if you ever watched a show, it's not like it picks up from the very last scene that it ended on the last thing. It could have been 2 weeks. It could have been 3 weeks. And it allows the audience to create this kind of narrative in their minds that they feel that they're like living with this person through their lives. And they're just kind of every so often checking in on their friends to see how they're doing, And that's the way I look at the miniseries aspect of it. And it's something that, we're considering heavily in terms of like our next steps and like what we're going to invest the rest of our company's future in.
And I want to get to your future here in a sec as we're getting toward the end here. But I have you ever seen Ozark?
I have.
Okay, so my girlfriend and I were late to the train on the Ozark, but we finally got through season 1. So I'm not spoiling this for anyone because I'm sure everyone's watched it by now. But we got to the episode, because I think it was episode 7 or 8, where they did a pure flashback episode where these characters you've been following now for over 6 hours through this down in the Ozark, they take it to years ago and they're showing you what happened. But it was so impactful and so genius because they've developed these characters of who you think they are. But now they're taking you back, and it's so more impactful because I've already gone on this journey with them, but now you're giving me the backstory to all of them. And I just think it's an art. I think it's an art with great writing, how you can do that with a series. Whereas with a movie, it's going to be harder to have. You might be able to do it, but I don't think you're going to have that impact because we just don't have as much invested at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think subconsciously we also understand when we're watching movies that this is it. Like this is all it's going to be. There's not going to be a follow through of this. So I'm not going to get as invested in this because I understand it's like there's going to be an end to this. Whereas I think with a season or an episodic content, it gives a little bit more longevity. And look, I'm advocating against the stuff that I'm doing, but it's funny, but it's truth. I mean, that's the truth. And that's why I think a lot of these platforms have been successful. I mean, it's not the feature films that have made the Netflix giants that they are. It's the episodic content. I mean, that's the truth. That really is the truth.
Okay. And As far as the future for yourself, for the Indie Film Factory, you've done so much already. You're doing a lot right now. Is there anything that you haven't done that, well, you just mentioned the series potentially, getting into that type of work. Is there, what's the future here? What do you got your eyes set on next? Because I know your wheels are always turning.
I just recently came across, and I'm a slow learner. Like I'm a little late bloomer here, but recently came across an unbelievable animation program that is something that I wish my like 12-year-old self had, back in the early 90s, and with that, I started my career as wanting to be an animator, I was an illustrator and animator, and so I see potential that I could be doing something in the animation space pretty soon, which is really exciting for me, because not only does it bring me back to my origins of like the things that I love to do, but it's just the endless possibilities of these characters and these narratives that I can tell. I think I'll continue to make narrative features, or we're talking about maybe possibly pivoting some of our live action stuff into episodic things, but I am looking at expanding into animation, and of course my writing. I mean, I'm dedicated to writing at least 6 books to the Myron Pesky series, and hopefully far beyond that. And then when it runs its course, I'll move on to a new series.
Yeah, on to the next thing. And Kelly, this is phenomenal, and I want people, they're gonna have to get the book. What film schools don't tell you, because there's so much great information in there. You got Myron Pesky, you have your other books. Where should the people go to not only find you, to find the Indie Film Factory if they want to get your books? Where are all the places people can go online?
Well, I'm on Instagram, Director Kelly on Instagram. They can search me by name on Amazon, and they can pull up movies. They can pull up all my books, and of course, indiefilmfactory.com is our studio. And we're going to keep on doing what we do. I don't know how long I can continue running a studio in a changing economy. It's always interesting. There's so much new technology now that is changing how we create content, to the point where you may not even need a studio in the future to do stuff. Like we were talking about our phones and just the technology that's built into these things. You may not need a green screen, but at the end of the day, I'm going to keep on doing this as long as I can, and I love doing it.
And, I've told people about you. I'm like, hey, this guy I know in Vegas, I'm like, he figured it out. He figured it out.
I would say figuring it out. That's
figuring it out. You figured a lot out. You're always figuring it out, but you found a way. No, you found a way to live your dream and make money at it. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things a human can do.
Very much. And I'm a fan of you, Sam. I mean, you're such a gracious person and a wonderful host. And I'm so thankful that you gave me the opportunity to come and talk to you and your people.
Awesome. Well, likewise to you, my friend. I look up to you. I admire you, respect you. And I always give the guest the last word. It can be as deep or as shallow as you want. It can be anything. It can be an idea, a concept, a philosophy, absolutely anything. What do you want to leave us with?
I would just say this. Just understand that the person you may not disagree with, chances are they want the same things as you.
I love that. That's so simple yet so powerful. Kelly, thank you so much for doing this. I'm glad we made this happen. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in person again soon. Hopefully real soon. And to get together and talk creative things. Stick around for just a second after I end the recording. But Kelly, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much, brother.
All right. Take care.